I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are meeting today and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are online with us today. And in my case, I acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. For this webinar, the presenter is Chris Cosgrove. Chris runs SustenanceAsia and works with the cotton industry on their sustainability programs, amongst many other things. Chris has been the lead organiser on the project between the cotton industry through the Cotton RDC and Cotton Australia, and a number of cotton growing regional NRM organisations, looking at how we might be able to link all of our targets together and be consistent from the ground through to international frameworks. And it's this project that we're going to get a bit of a review of today. We will do questions and we will do feedback. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Chris Cosgrove and get him to share his screen, and we can get stuck into the presentation for today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kate, and hello everyone. It's great to see you all here. Just full disclosure as well, I've been a big fan of Regions as the entity for driving change for many years. In 2010, I established a US non-profit livability community building CEO here. I was the CEO of that. And more recently, I've managed through the recruitment process for NRM South and been appointed to the board. So very lucky to do so. And I think there's a few NRM South here in Tasmania on the call. So great to have them involved. Let me just, as Kate said, I'll share my screen now. And I've got about 22 slides, but you'll be glad to know I'm only using 4 of them today. The rest are fairly detailed and they provide a record of evidence basically for Kate Forrest. So if anyone wants to dig in more detail, they're there if you have them. So keeping it pretty high level just today. And as Kate said, happy to take any questions that you have at the end. So this project, this collaboration with the Australian cotton industry and NRM Regions aims to address a problem. The problem is that efforts to protect native vegetation on farms across Australia haven't been as effective as any of us would like, despite the best intentions and significant investment of many people, including farmers. The project has, leading from that, its origins in an idea that biodiversity outcomes, and specifically, which is the focus of this project, native vegetation outcomes. So native vegetation outcomes across the cotton landscape will be much greater if projects are coordinated at the regional level instead of relying on ad hoc biodiversity native vegetation projects by individual farmers. And so then the project finally seeks to answer a question. Can the cotton industry collaborate with the NRM regions where cotton is grown to pinpoint the actions that individual farmers can take to make the best contribution to biodiversity at the regional scale and to contribute to regionally specific NRM priorities, and that also that contribute to national and to global biodiversity protocols and biodiversity goals, and that can be measured so we can see exactly what impact we're having. So that's what we're trying to do, the problem, the idea, and the question we're going to have. And I'll talk you through the process we've worked on over the past 2 years now. But first, just a little bit of quick background to the cotton industry and why we're having this discussion now on native vegetation. So the cotton industry, cotton is grown traditionally from about central Queensland, which is about here, Clermont, Emerald, down to the Victorian border. There are 7 NRM regions, which I'll show you later, within those traditional cotton growing areas in Queensland and New South Wales. Also starting to be grown in very small specific areas in Northern Australia as well. Cotton is an annual summer crop. So that means it's planted once a year. Unlike wheat and barley, which are winter crops, they grow through the winter. Cotton is planted about now and grows through the summer. In about 6 months' time, when cotton is harvested, it goes to a gin, which is short for an engine, where the cotton lint, the white fluffy stuff, is separated from the seed and the leaf matter. Every part of the cotton plant that's harvested is used. The lint obviously goes to textile mills all overseas, unfortunately, to be spun into textiles. The seed is used for cotton oil, for cooking, but also as stock feed. And many of the graziers in your regions heading into El Nino will be very familiar with the nutritional benefits of cottonseed as a stock feed, and 10% leaf matter, which used to be called cotton trash, but because we're all about circularity. That's one part of our sustainability work in cotton. And the first rule of sustainability is don't call something waste or rubbish or trash. We're now calling it leaf. That typically goes back into the fields as compost. So everything is used that's harvested. It's about a $2 billion a year industry, cotton. The last couple of years have been very big seasons because there's been lots of water. So that's been closer to $4 billion. There's around about 1,500 farms that grow cotton, that up to 1,500 farms, I should say. That varies a lot depending on how much water is around. We know from research that about 75 to 80% of local of expenses by those farms are spent locally. So it is a significant local employer and local contributor to the economy. The final bit of context is that it's the amount of cotton that's grown varies a lot depending on how much water is available. It's pretty simple. When there's a lot of water available, either lots of water in the soil when cotton is planted, and or water that might be in dams for farmers who have allocations of water, and or forecast of rainfall coming through, then lots of cotton will be planted. When there's not much cotton, you can see there are bad droughts, around 2007, 2019, very, very little cotton is planted. The other really interesting thing on this graph, just as an FYI, is you can see the dotted lines there are the averages. So you can see the dotted green line, the average area planted for cotton, planted to cotton over the past 30 years, had barely changed, but the average amount of bales picked of cotton each year has gone up significantly from about 2 million to 3.5 million. So not much cotton, more cotton is being grown, but a lot more cotton is being picked because of the efficiencies of the industry. It's a genuinely impressive industry to work for. I should note also, I'm an independent sustainability consultant, so the cotton industry is one of my clients. So the cotton industry, like most industries, and I can see, I saw before Jacob Beachross from the Beef Sustainability Framework is on the call. So the cotton industry, like most agricultural industries in Australia, has a sustainability framework. The cotton industry framework, sustainability framework, is called Planet, People, Paddock, environment, social and economic aspects. And like all sustainability frameworks, this is not just a wish list of nice things to manage. Sustainability follows a very structured and strategic process to identify what's most important. Here we've identified 9 topics across those environmental, social, and economic pillars, to prioritize what's most important, to set appropriate targets and policies and actions to manage what's most important, and then to measure process, and then to go back and tell your stakeholders how you're going so you can improve. You can see here 9 topics, as I said, one of which is biodiversity, which we've actually since changed to native vegetation, and I'll talk on that more later, but biodiversity is just in itself just a bit too big and hard to measure at an industry level, so we're focusing just on native vegetation. A bit easier to measure because it doesn't move, and the logic is if we get native vegetation right, the biodiversity will follow, the fauna will follow. The important thing about these industry sustainability frameworks is their whole of industry average. So when we measure progress, we're trying to aggregate up, the average water use on an average cotton farm in Australia, the average amount of greenhouse gas emissions per bale, et cetera, et cetera. So industry average, whole of industry. The purpose of them is to understand what's most important to the stakeholders of cotton, or for Jacob, who's on the call from MLA, in his case, what's most important to beef, et cetera, et cetera. So we can manage it, we can get data around what's happening, and we can look to improve where we need. Everything we do in cotton and the other ag sustainability frameworks are aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have targeted outcomes that we're working for. Every year, the cotton industry releases an annual update. You can see there's a annual update. It's pretty concise. We also have an Excel spreadsheet which has more detail, which has all the data sources, all the links, all the assumptions for people who want more detail. And we're very transparent about what goes right and what goes wrong. Obviously, in any natural system, particularly in a farming system, particularly in a natural and farming system where you don't have control. Okay, so we're talking about 1,500 farmers, 1,500 SMEs effectively, where the industry encourages people to move in the right direction, if you will, but has no direct control. So things don't always go exactly as you want, but we say what happens, we say what we're doing to improve if we don't quite get to where we want to do. And really encouragingly for the cotton industry, the longer you look, if you go back 20, 30 years, everything is moving in a really positive direction. Everything pretty much is moving in a really positive direction. So within those targets, those areas, you'll see there's biodiversity. As I said, we're now calling it native vegetation. We have draft targets for many of those areas, but we don't for two of them in particular, native vegetation and soil health. And both for the same reason, primarily, there's no nationally consistent way that's agreed to measure those things. Because cotton is grown on farms that also have crops and often have livestock as well, we don't want to go down the path of saying, this is how we're going to measure native vegetation, this is how we're going to measure soil, and then find in 2 or 3 years' time that other industries or other governments are measuring it in an entirely different way. So it's really important we have a consistent approach so as not confuse people. In addition to that no sort of nationally consistent way to measure, we know obviously that native veg is naturally complex. And we also know from cotton industry research that farmers, this is not so much a measurement problem, it's just an impact problem. We know when we ask farmers in research, what are the barriers to doing more in terms of native vegetation, restoration or protection on farms? There's 3 big things they tell us. One is that there's too many mixed messages. There are so many people, like everyone on the call, and governments and industries and others with mixed messages about what you need to be doing and using different language. So it's just confusing. For farmers as well, native vegetation, unfortunately, but it's the way it is, it's not their core business. Farmers see their core business as growing cotton or growing grain or growing livestock. The native veg is understood to be important, but it's not their core business. And because it's not their core business, they don't know exactly what to do or what they should be doing or how to guarantee its success. So there's a bit of uncertainty there. And finally, because there's so much mixed messages and because there's so much complexity here, farmers aren't confident that what they'll do will make a difference. There's something we hear a lot, what difference will I make? And particularly if I'm doing something that's not in line with what others are doing, or they're not contributing in the same way. So that's all those things are not new problems. And as I said, we have been waiting for nationally consistent ways to measure, nationally agreed ways to measure native veg and biodiversity. But that's going to take still a long time, I think. The problem we have as an industry, and food and fibre in Australia has, is that our customers aren't waiting anymore. They're wanting to see action. They're wanting to see more evidence on what's being done to protect native vegetation and biodiversity. So a couple of years ago, we took the action to move ahead in a proactive way. We recognised that customers are wanting to see more data and more evidence on what's been done on native vegetation on farms. So we've worked with the NRM regions where cotton is grown. There's 7 NRM regions there where cotton is traditionally grown, to come up with an approach which is supported by those NRM regions that meets the expectations of customers, but also hopefully makes sense in an Australian context. And there are 3 main parts to this solution. First is using the customer frameworks and the market-based sustainability frameworks that our customers use to come up with consistent indications, consistent terminology indicators for native vegetation. What we're looking at is extent, which is hectares, obviously, of native veg, and also we're looking at connectivity as well. Condition we don't have yet, just because we're looking at, and I'll talk about these shortly. We're looking at satellite-based data basically, and obviously that can't be measured by satellite-based data. So we're looking at ways to measure year-on-year change in native vegetation, extent, and connectivity. We're also then looking to set regionally appropriate targets for cotton farms in each region, so that in aggregate, the work that farms do will contribute to NRM regional plans. And finally, we're looking to model or to trial a concept where to address the concern that farmers tell us about inconsistency of messaging and not seeing the coordination they want to take action. A regional hub model where it could be the NRMs, it could be someone else, but effectively, let's say it's the NRMs are the source of truth for what has to happen in terms of native veg and biodiversity in a particular region. So that if you're a farmer and you want to do something on your farm, you or your trusted advisor, be that an agronomist or whatever it is, goes to your local NRM and you say, this is my farm, what exactly do I need to do? And that local hub has the information about what precisely has to be done on that farm, what has to be done to make it succeed, potentially some support, and then different industries or governments or impact investors or customers or whatever it might be can channel resources, information through those hubs as well. So that's a model where we're trialing as well. So 3 important things: consistent indicators, regionally appropriate targets, and regional hubs. And everything we do in cotton, because we're just one small part of a much bigger agricultural system, is designed to be scaled up. So if we can make this work with native veg in the cotton regions, The hope is that we can scale this up to soil and water, and I think social capital as well, for cotton, but also other industries, beef, sheep, grains, anything else really, can use the same approach if they wish, and if it works for NRMs elsewhere. So that's the solution. That's what we've done. Let me just talk you through now this final slide of some of the most important steps and the takeouts for it. So this had its genesis back in 2020 when I've mentioned we had some draft targets, and we had draft targets for all of our topics really. And we had about 350 people who provided comments on a survey. We did lots of phone calls, all those sorts of things. And I think 3 of those people said something which, you've got to go looking a little bit, but to me, this really resonated, that biodiversity is best managed at a regional scale. So if we're going to, as an industry, manage biodiversity, look for a regional entity to partner with and to collaborate with. Otherwise, we're continually reliant on ad hoc work, and it's just not going to have the same impact. So that was the idea. It just sort of, that idea just sort of festered. You know what it's like, everyone's busy. There wasn't enough time to progress it. Until 2021, I just happened to be on a call with Kate Andrews, the CEO of NRM Regions Australia, and we were put into a breakout room, and I just followed up later with a call to say, hey, Kate, this is the idea we have. Can we collaborate, with NRMs to work on this, to develop, to explore this solution, as we said. As a result of that, Kate Andrews and Kate Forrest pulled together a meeting of those 7 NRMs where cotton is grown. We explored the concept, secured buy-in support from those 7 NRMs to explore this in a bit more detail. Did a fair bit of desktop research. I spoke to each of the CEOs of those NRMs or their delegates, looked at not just their individual plans or priorities, but also a number of state and national and global frameworks, and also what cotton's doing as well, just to see if there's alignment between what everyone's doing. No surprise that there isn't a whole lot of alignment. There's a lot of commonality, but no really precise alignment in terms of the indicators that the different NRMs and the national and the state and the global sort of frameworks are using to measure biodiversity. Not a lot of consistency of terminology as well. So lots of broad agreement and broad alignment, but no specific consistency. So with that in mind, again, going back to the NRMs to say this is where we're at, over the next almost year or so, it took a lot of time just to develop and iterate and take on board other developments to come up with a solution of something that might work for cotton farms, that might work for NRMs, and to get their buy-in. And that roadmap and that solution was presented back to NRMs and who were involved and approved to go forward. And that had those 3 things I spoke about before. Consistent indicators, data sources, and definitions. So we have indicators around extent and connectivity, as I said. We piloted those definitions, and importantly, how to get data with 2 NRMs, Murray LLS and SQ Landscapes. SQ Landscapes did a lot of great work, in particular using satellite data and to sort of explore the indicators we were looking at. The initial indicator for the connectivity was around buffer zones on rivers and streams. So we're looking at the proportion of cotton farms that have a 50-meter, say, or 20-meter buffer zone on rivers and creeks. But what SQ Landscapes found was that the satellite data wasn't able to be able to map that in anything like the clarity we needed. So as a result, the indicator for connectivity changed to woody vegetation on cotton farms, and overlaying that with maps from NRMs of high priority ecosystems in riparian zones. So that's the connectivity we're looking for, is that connectivity of high priority ecosystems in riparian zones. So iterating was really important, and then we're currently consulting with customers on that. We're also consulting with growers, and this is where we're at now. So we've spent, as I said, a couple of years developing this model, setting up indicators, regionally appropriate targets, and we're in the final stages of doing face-to-face consultation with growers. They've been going on for about 8 months now. Really slow, obviously, getting to farmers that are scattered around Australia. They're busy with harvest and other work. but it's just really important that we speak to them one-on-one so that farmers have a chance to see it and hear what we're talking about. I won't be talking to you about the targets yet. I haven't spoken about targets. We haven't spoken to targets about anyone except for those 7 NRMs, because it's just so important we get grower feedback and buy-in before we go more publicly than that. But it's an essential step. And finally, the final piece was these regional hubs. We've had a lot of conversations with some of the NRMs who have been involved in this project, and with Kate and others. And we're evolving that process still. It's obviously a big piece of work. It may not even get off the ground, but we're planning as an industry to consult with some growers in southern Queensland and in New South Wales in the next couple of months to really just workshop what this might look like, and then to come back to this group of NRMs to see what might work or not. So that's the process. And as I said, there's a lot more detail for anyone who wants to dig in more. And I'm just going to talk now about some of the takeouts for me. I guess this is important for all of us, because we're all in the business of impact. And if I can share, any sort of the lessons I've seen anyway, then hopefully that will help. The first takeout for me is that good ideas are hard to find, but if they're good enough, they'll stick around. So it was almost a year before this idea became a more tangible path forward. But it is a problem that needs to be solved. It was a good idea, I think, that was suggested by several people in our stakeholder survey. So yes, so good ideas will eventually take shape, I think. The second takeout there for me from that second step is that just how important it was to have Kate there playing that role as gatekeeper. So for cotton, there's 7 NRMs. For beef, sustainability framework, there are multiple NRMs. I'm assuming there's probably 40 or so where beef is grown. So being able to get around all those NRMs is difficult. Having a single point of entry for an industry framework like cotton makes it so much easier to reach those NRMs. And also, of course, for those NRMs, I know you're all very busy. The NRM region Australia plays that gatekeeper role. So if it's a bad idea, they won't bother your time. So that role was just really important to get this whole process off the ground. The third step there is, I'll stand corrected from anyone who's on the call here who's been involved with 7 NRMs, but I like to think that some of those NRMs have been a little bit surprised by, I guess, the humility and the honesty and the openness, which I hope we're approaching as an industry, or approaching these conversations. The approach all along has been for the cotton industry to say, this is what we think should happen, but how will it work? And I think it's very important for any collaboration to be very honest and frank and transparent. And that includes understanding very clearly what everyone wants to get out of these things. So I'd like to think that, yes, we've, as an industry, have worked to be collaborative and worked to be honest. And I think, that most of the people who have been involved would probably agree with that that's really important, just to take that no nonsense and humble approach. The fourth takeout here for me is that I see collaborations as a lot like almost like a tech startup, a new product, because it is new, right? You're bringing people together, and people won't stay together from disparate backgrounds unless the problem is big enough and important enough to be solved, and the solution has been iterated enough so that it's just so compelling that people will line up to sign up for it. So again, drawing on almost like a tech product, if you look at some of the tech pitch decks and slide decks and that sort of stuff, they'll talk about quantifying the problem early on. And when I quantify this problem that we have about markets wanting to see more evidence of native veg and native veg not being managed or not being, probably more can be done, that is a problem that is urgent. It's a problem that's not going away, and it's a problem that's currently not being solved. So for me, it's important to quantify that, this really is a problem we need to solve. And we've worked really hard at iterating the process as we go along to come up with a solution. And we're still iterating as we talk to farmers all the time. Yeah. So a problem has to be solved, and iterating a compelling solution, I think, is really, really important. this is a bit nuanced, but you know, we're talking about biodiversity and native veg. It's complex, it's messy. There's lots of different ways of how this should be done. There's no agreed way to measure native veg and biodiversity, which is part of the problem in the first place. What we've done, not just for native veg, but as an industry, what we're doing for all of our sustainability work, wherever possible, is to take anything that's arbitrary away and base decisions on whether it's a science-based target or some sort of recognized framework or approach, so that when it came to having discussions around, you know, what are the indicators we should use to measure biodiversity and native vegetation, we drew on the frameworks or the indicators that are within most of the customer frameworks we use. So that just takes away the room for people to be putting forward very, very logical and sound approaches, but having you know, it just makes it much easier to have that consistency if you're and to stay on track if there's a credible, non-arbitrary approach you're taking instead. The final takeout for me there is that, look, progress is slow. I will be the first to admit that I like to get things moving as quickly as I can. But this is necessarily slow. We've got 7 NRM regions we're dealing with. We've got, as I said before, up to about 1,500 farms we're dealing with. It just takes time. So that, I think, unfortunately can't be resolved. But I would just note that, look, it's been great to have, you know, Kate and her role there and NRM Regions Australia to maintain. I think that contact point for me is just really important. I think, you know, I'm not trying to talk up Kate and Kate too much, but I think that role that NRM Regions Australia plays to be that entry point, and then the coordination role is really, really important. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. I hope that's not too boring for you, but I'll stop it there. I'm happy to go into as much detail as you'd like, and to take any questions you'd like as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chris, and I'm sure Kate and I will be paying for our talk, for you talking us up just after the meeting. We'll send you the cash. There are questions, so I'm going to start by going with the people who have got them in the chat as quickly as possible. You can pop them in the chat or pop your hand up, and Mark and I will keep track of you. So the first one is from Jacob, Chris, and Jacob's wondering, given the slow progress, that some of the targets and expectations, is there a risk that, considering the slow process, that some of the targets or expectations will be taken away from the industry and enforced on them instead?
Yeah, absolutely. There is, which is why it's, you know, it's good to go. So we're aiming towards, the cotton industry has what they call a general meeting in November of each year. It's where growers get together, and we're hoping to have a final position to that meeting to be endorsed by the industry, if you like, and then to go back to all of you and to other stakeholders, say this is what we're doing, just to make sure. That may not be, you know, stuck to. If who knows, if things get in the way, it may take even longer. But that's the time frame we're working to, Jacob. And yeah, absolutely, there's a risk. That's why we're keen to push it along. The feedback we get from customers is that they are focused. This is when I talk about customers, I mean the people who buy Australian cotton, be that Kmart or Levi's or Hugo Boss or whatever around the world. Their priority right now is trying to measure greenhouse gases in their supply chain. They're struggling enough with how to do that. They know biodiversity native veg is coming, but they haven't quite got their heads around that. So if they were further advanced, absolutely that risk would be much more likely and consequential. But the feedback we're getting right now is that they're just happy to see us making this approach proactively. We will continue to be engaging with them as we develop, well, we already are on the indicators. Once we finalise the targets, we'll be doing that as well. So, yeah, there is a risk. We're keen to push along as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Jacob, for the question. The next one's from Richard Stevens, and his question is, given that cotton paddocks tend to be a monoculture, well, have to be a monoculture, does this program assume cotton farmers have a certain percentage of non-cotton paddocks that are managed for conservation purposes?
So what we're measuring, so cotton is grown by farms, and those farms, you're absolutely right, they have fields that grow cotton. those fields will often also grow grains. They'll also have other fields that have livestock. And then they'll often have vegetation, which is normally not either grazed or cropped. And what we're measuring is the area of a farm that is typically, that has trees, the area has trees. We don't try and allocate a portion of it to a cotton farm as such, or to a cotton production. We don't say this farm has 25% cotton, therefore 25% of its veg is cotton. We're saying if a farm has 10 hectares of veg, then that's what it is. And if Jacob from beef is doing the same process later, then that same 10 hectares will be part of his total, if you like, as well. We're not trying to claim credits or to trade biodiversity. I think we're just saying on a farm that grows cotton, in aggregate, they have X hectares of native veg in 2023. Next year, that's gone up or down. Year after that, that's gone up or down. So that's what we're trying to measure.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Richard, for getting your question in. From Pip Jones, how do organisations like CSIRO, i.e. their IPM research, fit into this space? She's acknowledging that there are some pretty good relationships already in place.
Yeah, look, absolutely. So by IPM, I think you mean integrated pest management. That comes into IPM as one of the drivers, if you like, for a farmer to have vegetation in the landscape. So when it comes to having vegetation, as you know, some people do it just because it's the right thing to do. Some want to see money, some want to see an intangible benefit. So we need to push a lot of buttons. And for a lot of farmers related to this as well, I should say as well, we're at an industry trying to conduct industry scale natural and social capital assessments as well. So one of the things we can do, for example, is say, what's the value, the financial value of native veg in the landscape, be it through IPM or erosion control or shelter or whatever it might be. So we're looking at that. In terms of CSIRO specifically, so we've spoken to CSIRO, to people like their Look B and Look C people. We've engaged with them on initially if they could be a source of data. They probably weren't ideal for various reasons. We've also spoken to TERN, the Terrestrial Ecological Research Network, to be that data provider. Again, just hasn't got off the ground, but SQ Landscapes, I can see Andrew Davidson there, and his team at Toowoomba have taken a lead on that data provision instead. Really, really important, again, just from an industry scale point of view, that measuring data is really important, but it has to be cost effective. If it's really, really expensive and granular, then it's not what we need to tell the story, but it's also too expensive to do on an annual basis. It may be that in years to come we can get much more granular or be more willing to pay it, but because we're starting off this process, we just have to make it work. It's not exactly perfect. We're okay to live with that as long as we can tell people what's happening. So we're pretty excited by the work that Andrew and his team have been doing there, and so that's what we're doing. On an ongoing basis, we'll keep talking to Sarah and others about data and making sure they're happy with us and that sort of thing.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Pip, for the question. And there's also there's a bit of a follow-up from Yolanda related to the question. She's asking if the cotton pest management framework is integrated into this native veg critical component in IPM. So I think that you've probably
it is to the extent that it is to the extent that when we communicate to farmers why this is important, there's a number of, and I'll just delve into that a little bit more details. A number of drivers of why farmers might do this. One might be to mitigate risk or to manage opportunity. So you need to do this so you can communicate to customers either individually or as an industry what you're doing around native veg, or you need to do this because it might reduce the number of pesticides, which reduces costs, which improves margins around in use of pesticides, plus the other ecosystem services that veg can provide. So it's one part of a much bigger thing we need to do. And of course, it's not just IPM. You also get, you think about carbon storage and water quality and all these other things as well. So it's all tied up, isn't it?
There's a comment from Kate Andrews, which is, Thank you for the great history and the context from Chris. The potential of working with ag sustainability frameworks at a regional scale on indicators and targets, and through the use of regional NRM planning, was something NRM pushed with NFF in order to get funding for the project. So hats off to NFF for working with us on that, and the funding comes through the Department of Ag. So the reason that it's probably being mentioned more on this webinar than it has in previous ones is because that funding is coming to an end. So the Industry Partnership Project will be wrapping up in late October. NRM Regions Australia are looking at options of getting further funding so that there's a paid person or a paid position, a role that can continue to provide that central point, which both Chris and Andrew Davidson from SQL and a couple of others have pointed out was quite useful in getting this project to move forward, even as slowly as it did.
Essential, Kate, not useful, but essential. You've done a great job.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? Does anyone want to pop their hand up? Have we answered all of the questions that people have? Okay, I'm going to take silence as a yes. I've got a quick request. There's a link in the chat now, which is just a really quick feedback form that we do after each webinar. It's useful to promote the value of these webinars, and also it helps us find topics for future webinars. So please feel free to just hit that link and give us some feedback. That would be terrific. A big thank you to Chris Cosgrove and to all of the regions that have participated in this project, and I know a number of them are online today. It's been a pleasure working with you and making some headway in this space, which has been talked about for a really long time. So thank you, Chris, for the presentation. As Chris mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, he's gone through about four slides. He's presenting us with a review of the project and a summary in presentation form. So that will be available for people to have beyond the life of the project, or until the project is further funded in the future, if we're being optimistic. So, oh yeah. Okay, so Michael Cutting has made a suggestion around Kate Andrews' comments, because the funding's running out, that possibly there's potential for it to continue through the SAF roles with NRM bodies, which I hadn't considered, but maybe it is possible. So thanks, Michael, for that input, and thanks, Mark, for making sure I saw it. Okay. So a final thank you to Chris, a thank you to Mark for assisting me with keeping up with the questions, and all of you for participating. Thank you very much.